Over a month, around 6% of the UK gather together to worship Jesus.
It feels like we're too few to make a difference.
But the reality is, Monday to Saturday, God has us, scattered in the world, connecting to hundreds and thousands of people.
So wherever you are,
Whoever you are,
whatever you do,
you can make all the difference in the world.
And on Sundays, when we gather together,
we strengthen and empower one another to be sent out again.
For life on our front lines.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's good to be together. If we haven't met before, my name is Matthew. I'm one of the pastors here at Summers Road Mission. And we're going to be doing something slightly different this morning. We are in a series at the moment in the book of Genesis called Foundations for Life. And if you've been with us the last few weeks, we've been working through the first few chapters of the Bible, Genesis 1, 2, and 3. And at this point in our little series, we're going to take 3 weeks to explore some different themes that have come out of that. So today we're thinking about the theme of work and rest. Next week we're going to be thinking about the theme of human dignity. And then the week after that, we're going to be thinking about the theme of marriage, sex, and gender. And really to give a bit more time to thinking, what does this mean today? What does this mean in our lives? And hopefully to get a bit more practical, to explore a little bit of what that actually looks like in the day-to-day of everyday life. So today our theme is work and rest. And we're going to be using, as we go along, some of those videos. They've been put together by an organisation called the London Institute of Contemporary Christianity, which I found really helpful on this kind of topic. And we're going to start by just, again, reminding ourselves of what's come out of the book of Genesis. And then we're going to hear from some different people about what this looks like in their lives. And there might be a bit of interaction. And then we'll kind of come together at the end. So we'll start with this idea of work, and then we'll come to rest in a moment. You know, and there's three words that I want to highlight when it comes to work. Work is good, work is cursed, and work is worship. There's more that could be said, but we're going to go with those three. Firstly, work is good. We've seen this, haven't we, in the book of Genesis. So if you have the next slide, Genesis 1:26. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." And if you were here with us when we looked at Genesis 1, we explored that idea of being made in the image of God, that we've been made to reflect God and represent him on the earth. You know, our lives as human beings should in some way represent God and his rule here on earth. So part of what our work is to represent God in the places that he's put us, to use our influence to reflect him. And then if we look at Genesis 2:15, that also speaks of the goodness of work. The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. And again, we remember this is before things go wrong. You know, some of us want to put work, don't we, as a consequence of the fall. But Genesis won't let us do that. It's part of the good. God saw that it was good. And again, we talked about how this really emphasizes the stewardship idea of work, that part of what our work is to care for and protect and guard and develop this world that God has put us in. So we've seen from Genesis that work is a good part of God's creation. If we get to the next picture up. If you could retire today, you know, if you got that payment or some great aunt you'd forgotten about sent, you know, a huge amount of money, so much that you could spend the rest of your life with your feet up by the pool, would you do that? Is that an attractive future? I think sometimes that's held out, isn't it? As that would be it. You know, that's what life could, you know, that's the best it could ever get. That's not actually God's vision for life. You know, holidays are great, aren't they? But God's vision for life is not putting our feet up by the pool for the rest of our lives. Actually, work and reflecting him and caring for his world is part of his design for us. And I think often today, and we talked about this before, often today we make the mistake of equating value in our work with money. So we think of work, it's only important as a means to make money. Sometimes we might think of it maybe as a necessary evil. We have to do it to get money to live. But if we didn't have to do it, we wouldn't. Or we make the mistake, don't we, of saying that a higher salary means more valuable work. See how so often we connect, don't we, the value of our work with the money that we get for it. But do you see how Genesis and the vision of work that Genesis brings us actually is not linked to money, is it? It's linked to God and his calling. And what gives our work value is actually God's mandate for us as human beings. There's low-paid jobs, aren't there, that are of great work, a great worth. It was interesting, I think, during COVID, who were the essential workers? Who were the workers that we couldn't do without? It wasn't people in the top of the skyscrapers, was it, in the corporate business? It was delivery drivers. It was people putting stuff on shelves. It was people in the hospitals. And lots of those aren't hugely high-paid jobs, but they're very valuable. And there's lots of people who aren't able to earn for all sorts of different reasons, but can be involved in this work that God has for us as human beings. It might be people who are at home looking after children, people who are retired, people who are refugees or asylum seekers. Some of you might have seen in the email for this week that Shahram is offering after the service today to cut people's hair. Shahram's a hairdresser by trade. He's an asylum seeker. And if you know the laws in this country, while people are waiting for their cases to come back, people aren't allowed to earn money, but he's got a skill to use. So he's offered after the service, I think just in this little lobby here, if there are men or boys who want hair cutting, he'll cut people's hair. And people, if you want to, you can give a bit of a donation to the Refugee and Asylum Seeker Ministry Fund. But isn't that a good example? It doesn't need to be paid work, does it? But we've got skills to use. We've got ways we can contribute. I know people are not right now thinking, oh, I need a haircut. You've got about 40 minutes to work that through and decide. Or yesterday I had the pleasure of going to visit Beryl. Lots of us will know Beryl. She just moved to a nursing home in Guiseley. And while we were spending some time together, I asked her, Beryl, how can I be praying for you? And she said two things. She talked firstly of just the need for her to be cared for in her fragility, and so for people to care for her well. But then she said, pray that I be a witness. It's important, isn't it, that we're a witness to those around her. She's gone into that home. She's conscious that God can use her, and she wants to reflect God and his character. So work is good. That's the first thing that we see. Work is cursed, and this comes, doesn't it, in Genesis chapter 3. So I'm going to read from verse 16 to 19. To the woman, he said, I will make your pains in childbearing very severe. With painful labor you will give birth to children. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. To Adam, he said, because you listened to your wife and ate fruit from the tree about which I commanded you, you must not eat from it. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil you will eat food from it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you will return. You see how what God has given us to do, this mandate to multiply and rule over the earth in God's likeness, suddenly is cursed, isn't it? And it's frustrated, both in raising children, but also in working the ground. Where work before was a joy, now it's frustrating. And it's hard. There's toil. It's exhausting. It's difficult. So that should be our expectation for work. And actually, it doesn't matter what your job is. I think often we can think, if my work's frustrating, the issue is this particular job I'm in. And if only I could change my job and land that dream job, I'd escape and I'd have that kind of work day where you just begin and it's brilliant all day long. Who's got a work day like that? Anybody? It doesn't matter, does it, what job we're doing? Work is difficult. It's frustrating at times. There's toil. Because actually work is under the curse. Ecclesiastes talks about this. Ecclesiastes is written by King Solomon, and he had so many resources at his disposal. He was involved in all kinds of amazing projects, but this is his conclusion. if we have is there Ecclesiastes slide? There we go. My heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for my toil. So he recognizes the goodness, but then, yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. There is satisfaction in our work, but actually if we look to our work to fulfill us in every way, we'll get frustrated, we'll be left frustrated. Tim Keller put it this way. He said, "You will not have a meaningful life without work, but you cannot say that work is the meaning of your life." It's a helpful tension, isn't it? Work is good, it's important, but it's cursed. It's not everything, it's frustrating. And then thirdly, work is worship. So there's a couple of verses I want to read from the New Testament. Romans 12 verse 1 says this. It says, "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship." Now, when I use the word worship, what often comes to mind? It's what we've just done, isn't it? Singing in church. We think that's what it is to worship. But in the Bible, worship's bigger than that. And actually, you see in this verse, God's calling on our lives is to offer our bodies as a living sacrifice. Everything we do, every act in our day, we can offer in worship to God. And that includes our work. We see this again in Colossians. So Colossians chapter 3. Verse 17 says, "Whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him." All of our lives could be offered to God. Or in verse 23, and he's actually talking to slaves here about their day by day. He says, "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you're serving." That changes our perspective, doesn't it, on the workplace, on what we're doing tomorrow, this time tomorrow. Actually, God cares about that, and it matters to him, and we can offer our work to him as part of our worship. One of the writers and thinkers and speakers that I've found most helpful on this topic is a man called Mark Green. If we have the next slide up. He works for LICC, which stands for the London Institute for Contemporary Christianity. And he speaks a lot about this, about kind of ministry in the workplace. If we have the next slide up. One of the first things I read of his, I think, was it's almost like a leaflet called The Great Divide. And he's talking about the sacred-secular divide. It can be very easy, can't it, to think God is interested in what we're doing right now when we sat in church, but this time tomorrow, wherever we might be, well, that doesn't matter to him. God kind of picks up his interest again on Tuesday night in growth groups, and we've got to wait a while. Maybe our little time in the morning when we read the Bible and pray. And there was this quote that he'd heard from someone, a teacher. It says, "I spend an hour a week teaching Sunday school, and they haul me up in front of the church to pray for me. The rest of the week, I'm a full-time teacher, and the church has never prayed for me. That says it all." It's thought-provoking, isn't it? There can be a danger that we give the impression as a church and to one another that what matters, what God cares about, is what happens in this building. But actually, God cares about what we're doing. He's concerned about the work that he's given us to do and how we go about it. He's put us in all sorts of different places, and we'll come to that in a moment, where he's got purposes for us, when we can represent him and serve him. If you have the next slide, he kind of tallies up, and I guess this won't apply to everyone, but gives a rough idea, of 168 hours in the week, gives 48 of those go to sleep, maybe 10 will go to church-related activities, kind of official meetings of the church. Well, that still leaves 110 waking hours remaining. And I think in many ways, Mark Green's priority is to help us think, how do we use those 110 hours fruitfully for the Lord? So we have the next slide. He says, globally, 98% of Christians are neither envisioned nor equipped for mission in 95% of their waking lives. But just imagine if they were. It's thought-provoking, isn't it? We have so much opportunity during the week to serve the Lord, to reflect him, to represent him. And sometimes when we're thinking about that, we just think about opportunities to share the gospel. And that's an important way that we can work in a way that honors God. But it's bigger than that. If we have the next slide. He has another book called Fruitfulness on the Front Line. And one of the focuses of that is to expand our vision a bit for what fruitfulness means. Again, often we're thinking automatically, aren't we, about the opportunity maybe to share the gospel with a colleague. And that's part of fruitfulness, but he says it's bigger than that. So he has these 6 M's. To be fruitful on the front line, there's an opportunity to model godly character, the fruit of the Spirit. Making good work. So actually just going about our work well matters to God. Ministering grace and love. Molding culture. Sort of shaping the environment that we're in and so that it reflects God and his values. Being a mouthpiece for truth and justice. And then sixthly, being a messenger of the gospel. Being fruitful is big, isn't it? It includes all sorts of different components of our day and our work. The last book I'll mention of his that I found helpful is a book called Thank God It's Monday. Actually, I had this out on my desk as I was preparing, and one of the kids came in and saw it and said to Alice, why is Daddy reading a book on Lego? But it's a really helpful book. And, in it, again, he's talking about the opportunities that each of us have in different places that God's put us to represent him. And this is one example he gives of Penny, who it says, Penny has been on the buses for 7 years. She's a warm, down-to-earth, no-nonsense sort of person. It's not an easy job, trying to soothe stroppy, frozen-footed, frustrated passengers who've been waiting 45 minutes in the rain for the one that didn't come, trying to treat everyone who asked for a ticket as a human being, as someone in God's plan, trying to go by the rules and not let the pensioners onto the bus before 9 just because all the other drivers do, trying to chat to her regulars, some of whom are just plain lonely and come out for a ride into town for the company, trying and sometimes blowing it, being herself and, as she puts it, trusting that through it all, God will use her somehow. It's a tough place to work. Lots of affairs, lots of divorce, lots of gossip. Pen, as they call her, tries not to get involved. Sometimes she says, I don't want to hear about it. Sometimes she simply withdraws from the scene. People miss her. She responds, I don't want to spend my free time cooped up in an office talking about everyone's ins and outs. But when the chips are down, it's often Pen who people tell things to. After all, they can be sure she's not going to sit in an office blabbing it to the world. Similarly, it's often others who ask her questions about Jesus. They just come to her. She laughs with a mixture of joy and disbelief that God uses her in this way. I feel unworthy of it, really. And it's just an example of someone that God has put, for Penny, it's on the buses, where she can be used to represent and as God's image. And in a moment, we're going to hear from some other members of the church family where God's put them, but first we're going to watch another video that introduces that theme.
"10 hours a day,
6 days a week.
Whenever I'm needed,
Every Saturday morning.
I spend my time
In a place that matters to God.
with people that matter to God.
My front line.
In the stresses,
successes,
Problem solving.
Tantrum resolving,
laughter,
Teamwork.
jokes,
tears,
boredom,
Tension.
cups of coffee,
cans of Coke.
God is working with me.
He helps me see what he sees.
put here by God.
He knows the day ahead.
This place is rich with possibilities.
This is my front line.
If I invite those that are going to come and share up to the front, so Margaret and Kim and Ian and Tommy. I just want to give a sense of, for different people in the church family, what this looks like for them. And, for all of us, this could look different, couldn't it? About where God's put us, what God's given us to do. Sometimes God's given us multiple different things to do in our week. We've got lots of different types of good work, and that can be all sorts of different things. Caring for a family member, it might be a salaried job. It could be looking after young children. It could be, responsible for looking, for keeping an area tidy. All sorts of different things. But we just wanted to give a sense of some examples in the church family, and then we'll have a chance to think about what this looks like for us. Tommy, I'll give that to you. I've just got two questions for each of you. Firstly, where has God put you? So just tell us briefly kind of what is the good work he's given you day by day, and then what opportunities you have in that to reflect and worship him. Tom, are you happy to start?
Yeah, so hello. Yeah, so I work as an operations manager in a chocolate factory. Chocolate was essential work, by the way, during COVID, so somehow, but yeah, so it's a very demanding job, but also at the same time rewarding. I have around 200 people reporting to me through different managers, so I have like 8, actually more than that, 12 managers reporting to me, and different shifts as well, working so 24/7. So that means that I have to be on the phone very often, even weekends sometimes when things happen. But I think I do see that as a very rewarding job, because that means that I have direct influence over 200 people, which is, and not even beyond that, because I do work with people across the site, and also work with people from other countries as well. So in a sense, I think I have a really important really important part of decision making in the site. So in a sense, it's very rewarding, because I do have a strong responsibility for the well-being and the welfare of a lot of people in my site. In terms of obviously, as Matthew mentioned, work is supposed to be good, and I do enjoy at times, although there are most of the times, unfortunately, it's also frustrating, demanding, and where I am also, I have to deal a lot with things like people cases, dismissals, unfortunately, grievances, and consultations with union. So it is. We are currently going for a process as well. So it is a lot of pressure in that sense as well.
When I asked Tommy to share, he said, I can share, but it's not going very well at the moment. So, yes. Work can be frustrating, can't it?
I know, so I'm not sure. I have a face at the moment of being a bit overwhelmed, but at the same time, I do thank God for the job, and people who know me, I never moan about my job. I might be frustrated, I might be stressed at times, but I'm ever so thankful for the job that I have. I do believe that God put me in this job for a reason, and I have a lot of examples where I could see God's will in that sense, in some decisions I made, or some challenges that I had to deal with.
And Tommy, in the day by day, the decision making, what's on your mind in terms of reflecting God's character? Yeah,
so I think one thing, when I pray every day, I do thank God for work and for the things that the responsibility that I've been given. So an important part of, I think, the Genesis series has been really refreshing for me to look back and see, work is meant to be like this, but we have a mission in work. And sorry, I won't just take a bit more time, but just wanted to share that, I shared some time ago in Connected about a book that has been a really big help and impact in my life. It's Every Good Endeavor. I just have it here, a copy of it, by Tim Keller. It is really, really great literature that reminds us that the work is meant to be good, but because of sin, work is what we see is frustrating. It's hard work. It's difficult, but we know that just as we've been freed by grace through Jesus Christ on that cross, we've also been freed from the expectations of the world in terms of work. So we are no longer bound to pursuing fame or pursuing good money or promotion. And just a quick summary, I don't want to spoil the rest of the sermon by Matthew, but 3 main things here that reminds me of how faith reshapes my view of work is, first of all, is motivation. It's, I no longer work to please other people, or to earn money or to pursue something material of this world, but it's to please God. So it's an act of worship. So it's every opportunity, that every decision that I made to please God ultimately, and that means that it doesn't matter how much I earn or how much I gain, or even if I get failings, because God is pleased and with what I do. Second one is also how I value work. So, and it's tied to the first one. So even if I have a failure, or a project doesn't go ahead, or I make a wrong decision, or ultimately if I get emotional, or I don't get the job that I want, or or anything of that, God still values my work and values where I am put. So that is a very important, because sometimes we do work hard to get onto the career ladder and get into places, but ultimately, no matter where you are, God values that work. And I think that's been a big burden for me. I was a really career person in the past, and knowing that I don't have to really worry about where I am, I think that's been really, really it gave me a lot of peace. And lastly, it's how I work, how I see how I should work. And in that sense, I spent almost half of my days during the week at work, so it's a lot of time. So definitely, God, it's a great opportunity for us to practice God's commandments. And I think the biggest commandment, apart from worshiping God, is actually love one another. We love our neighbor. So it's actually practicing love as well at work. So it starts with, obviously, myself being respectful, being responsible, trustworthy, and a good team player. But also it's about how do we actually treat others with love? How do we are slow to anger and be merciful to others, or be gracious to others, and doesn't even start from the time that I go into the factory, but it's actually from the time I set off out of home, from a commuting through Bradford to Halifax. It's how would I use the opportunities of that to be gracious to others?
Thanks, Tommy.
Sorry.
Do you want to pass the microphone to Margaret? Margaret, no worries if you haven't got a 3-point sermon. That's okay. Margaret, just tell us a little bit about the good work God's given you to do day by day.
Okay. I'm currently living in sheltered accommodation. It's a purpose-built complex of about 36 flats of people all in my age group, so we have a lot in common. And what happens with me, I've actually taken it on board to pray for everybody by name. I think by now I know nearly everybody by name, maybe not much more, but I can pray for them. And sometimes there are opportunities to pray with people. We meet people in the corridor, in the laundry, or in the car park, and sometimes you find out what's going on in their lives, and it's good to be able just to stop and pray with them for what's happening in their lives right there and then. A lot of it's sort of very ordinary stuff, building relationships, playing Scrabble or dominoes, or making tea, or chatting to people, a bunch of flowers sometimes, a hug sometimes, things like that. But there are sometimes opportunities to talk about the possibilities of really knowing God. And I'm thankful that I've now got the Bible on my phone. That's something for me. So it can be a lot more straightforward if I'm with somebody. I can say, I've got this in my pocket. Can I just read you something from the Bible? And I've done that a time or two. Can't always do that, but certainly can pray with people. And I'm very thankful that where I am, there's also Molly, who's around somewhere. She's much better at the evangelistic side of things than I am, but it's good to be with her. And then we have a Christian neighbour and friend who is also involved. So there's lots of opportunities, very ordinary stuff, but building relationships and just letting people know there's a God you can trust for whatever happens in your life.
Thanks, Margaret, for sharing. Kim, just tell us a little bit about where God's put you, what the good work He's given you to do day by day.
Yeah, so my role is I'm a stay-at-home mum or a family manager. For a long time, when people ask me my job title, I would say I'm just a stay-at-home mum. Our children are 6 and 3 now, and over the years I've learned that the work involved in raising children is very hard. It's challenging, it's never-ending, it's emotional and it's physical, and it's full-time, and it's a very important role. And it's also very rewarding and a great blessing as well. And I'm thankful that God's called me to serve my family full-time at home. My husband works full-time, and he can work very long hours. So my role is also to serve him and to support him, and that's not just in his role as a GP, but that's also in his role here at the church as an elder. So yeah, I think now if people was to ask me what my job title was, I would confidently say that I'm a stay-at-home mum, because over time I've understood that not only am I serving my family, but in doing that I'm also serving the Lord as well. So ways in which I reflect God throughout the week and how my time spent with him. My eldest is at school now and full-time, and my youngest is at nursery 2.5 days, so this frees some time up for me. So in this time I use it to reflect, and the way I connect with God is through music. So I love my cleaning days. I love having the music on full, and just being able to know that nobody's around, I'm on my own, and I can just pray out loud and just worship him how I want and when I want. And I think this past month or these past few weeks, God's really pushed me out of my comfort, and he's really challenged me, and it's been a great blessing to be able to meet up with people in the church, new and old, and to be able to pray with them, and just to build up them friendships, and just to connect, especially with new families that have just joined. And also another one that God's really blessed us with at the minute is the new Parenting for Faith course that I'm leading with Megan and Lois and Alison. Again, that's a great opportunity to connect with other parents, to share ideas on how we can raise our little ones to know Jesus, to be praying for them, to be encouraging them, and just joining each other in prayer and supporting each other. So yeah. Thanks,
Kim. Ian, thanks for waiting. Ian, just tell us a bit about where God's put you, what the good work he's given you to do day by day.
I've got 2 daughters and 2 granddaughters, so I'm just glad I'm not a stay-at-home mum. Well done. I've been there, I've seen it. I left school and I was a furniture maker, trained cabinet maker, and then I left that and went into carpentry and joinery. So I often say that the greatest carpenter in history taught me all I know. Some of you might know him. So my last 30 years have basically been in the building trade. My mission field is the building trade. It's not that I've got a particular burden for that trade, it's just that that's where I am day by day, and I've got a burden to share my faith with everybody. I've been forgiven of everything I've ever done. I've experienced God's grace and love, and I want to tell that to the world. So I see the world every day. I meet a lot of people through the building trade. The people in the building game are quite a unique sort of people. They're quite rough, hard. A lot of them are big drinkers, drug takers. The language and the things they speak about is pretty out there. We can't even go there on a Sunday morning church. And I lived that life for 20 odd years with ease. But the last 11 years since getting saved, being in that environment, obviously things become different, but I've become a real evangelist. I need answers for everything. And that helps me because in the building game, meeting lads like this, they challenge you to see what you are and how you're changing. And God's brought an unbelievable amount of opportunities over the years to share with people. Sometimes I look back and I think, how on earth did that come about? Just a situation where I was put in to share with somebody. And you might think it's quite an intimidating environment to share, but they're pretty real people. They're down to earth, and especially when it's from one of their own. I've had real fruit, and in all the years, I can honestly say I've never really been badly received. Most people respectfully accept and sort of like think, yeah, you've got a point, and they're very reachable sort of people. And again, in all the 30 years I've been in the building game, I can honestly say I've never met, whether it's in domestic construction or building sites or workshop, I've never met a single Christian. And it's a massive industry in this country, so that shows the lostness. These people are in pubs after work and everything like that, and often not thought about. But so I have a real burden to share with these people.
And Ian, obviously, you're not spending every minute of every day talking about Jesus, or I doubt you'll be in your job for very long. You know, how does God's call in your life affect the way, if you're putting together a window frame or whatever it might be, how does it affect the way you're doing that part of the work?
There's been times where I'm sharing and I've put a bit longer time on the end of the day because of my conscience. I've been talking to somebody about the things of God and things like that. So I didn't get that question.
So in terms of actually how you go about the job God's given you to do in terms of carpentry, how does God's calling affect that? How do you reflect God's character in that?
Well, first of all, one thing I was going to add just before that question was that I was brought in off the building sites. I've come into workshop work lately in the last couple of years. And I come away from like working with 30 lads who I'm sharing with all the time, and brought into a workshop with really just a couple of people there. But within days I realised the work there, and I got chatting to an old guy who'd lost his son through suicide and things like that, and had a terrible life. And the Lord used an old thug, hooligan joiner like me to come into his life and pour his grace into this man's life, and I was sharing with him daily, and we got deep about the things of God. Then at Christmas he just died. He got a blood clot and he died. We were out of there just like that. But in it all, I just saw that God gave him opportunities, so it's really a blessing to sort of like be used like that. But in the workplace itself, working with these types of people, they turn up late, they go home early, they have long breaks, they can get away with everything they can. Quite often they have days off, drunk and drugs and stuff like that. That is the type of people, so obviously I'm different to that. So the Bible says not to take the name of the Lord in vain, and it's important that if we're going to take the name of Christ, we've got to take it into our families, into our workplace, and reflect who he is. So the very fact that I don't behave like so many people around me does reflect Christ, and they knew what I was like before, and they've seen the change. And I think it's important to be honest, to be trustworthy, to be genuine, to be hardworking, and then they can see, because they're watching you all the time as a man of God in this world, they're watching you. And because if and when you fail, they're like, I thought you were a man of God, so it's important to reflect his character. And that's a battle as a fallen man. But by God's grace, I'm in there, and it's worth it, and I want to do it. So
thank you, and thank you all for sharing. It's helpful, isn't it? Just to get a little window for 4 members of the church family of what this looks like. What we're going to do now, just for sort of 5 or 6 minutes, is turn in pairs or maybe in threes and ask those questions to one another. If you think about us in the room here, God's put us in all kinds of places, hasn't he? This time tomorrow, we'll be in all kinds of places and contexts. So ask one another, where's God put you? What's the good work he's given you to do day by day? And what opportunities might you have to reflect and worship him through that? So let's turn into pairs or threes and just share a bit of what this looks like in our lives. Well, it might be that we want to keep those conversations going after the service, over some tea and coffee. I'd love to have some kind of way where, we could just, I'm sure there is some technical way of doing it, but I can't think of it, where we could just capture what that is for us as a room. But it's not quite as effective, but I'm going to have a go. I'm just going to come up each aisle, okay? And if you want to, just put your hand up, and I'll just put the microphone under your mouth. And you could just say in a word or a sentence, where God's put you. And it won't capture all of life, will it? But somewhere that God's put you this week. It could be a job that you've got to do. It could be a place that you're in. And it might just give us a little bit of a feel of where we're going to be this coming week. So be brave. If no one's brave, I'll just put the mic under your mouth anyway, okay?